Cleopatra. Cleopatra was born at the beginning of 69 BC or at the end of 70 BC in Egypt. Cleopatra, although known as Egypt's greatest queen, had not even the smallest drop of Egyptian blood. She and her entire family, which consisted of several siblings, was what was called Macedonian Greek. Greek in customs, tradition, and language. She also spoke several other tongues besides her own, including Arabic and Egyptian, Egyptian being a language that her predecessors, including her father who was the king of Egypt, didn't even bother to learn, and she could also read hieroglyphs. At the age of 17, Cleopatra became co-regent or co-ruler of Egypt with her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy, and following his death after a massive civil war, she married her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, who was only 6 years old. This meant that Cleopatra, the eldest of the two, was the supreme ruler. Cleopatra turned out to be very good at politics and was able to bring prosperity and peaceful times to a country which had become poverty-stricken and torn apart by war. But it was only the beginning. Cleopatra met Julius Caesar when she was 21 years old. Caesar was charmed by the youthful and intelligent woman and took her to Rome with him, and thus began the most famous affair in history. One historian states that, contrary to popular view, Cleopatra only allied with him because of shared political views rather than romantic love. Nevertheless, a year or two later she bore him a son named Caesarion, though Caesar never publicly acknowledged him as his son, much to Cleopatra's dismay. A few years later, Caesar was assassinated, and Cleopatra left Rome and returned to Egypt once more. In order to have full power of the throne and have sole control of Egypt, Cleopatra murdered her brother, who had been ruling in her absence, and appointed Caesarion, her son, to the throne. In 41 BC, one of Caesar's most famous generals, Mark Antony, whom Cleopatra had met a few years before, summoned her to meet him in Tarsus. Thus began Cleopatra's second love affair. However, historians do say that her interest in Mark Antony was not purely political as it had been with Caesar, but was born of a true romantic interest in him. It is shown in the records of the time that the two lovers returned to Egypt and were married in the Egyptian tradition, and had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, by their union. It seems that Cleopatra had finally found her happiness, but sadly, it wasn't to last. On September 2nd, a few years after they were married, Cleopatra and Mark Antony combined armies to take on the forces of Rome that were controlled by Octavian, a ruthless Roman general whom over time had become Cleopatra's worst enemy. Facing defeat, it has been said that until recently, in an act of incredible cowardice, Cleopatra turned and fled the battle. However, according to records recently uncovered, it is now said amongst historians that her escaping was part of a planned maneuver rather than cowardice on her part. Mark Antony, seeing Cleopatra escape, decided to abandon his fleet and follow her as she made her return to Egypt. There they lived in relative safety for nearly a year. However, as previously mentioned, Octavian was ruthless, and he pursued Mark Antony to Egypt, where Antony's troops deserted him after Octavian's appearance. Mark Antony found himself in a hopeless situation, and he chose to take his own life. Cleopatra became a virtual prisoner of Octavian, and he planned to parade her around Rome to make sure everyone knew how great of a general he truly was. Cleopatra had other plans. Just 11 days after Mark Antony's death, Cleopatra herself committed suicide in her chambers in Rome, virtually ruining Octavian's plans. In the end, it was she who had the last word. Though legend suggests that Cleopatra ended her life through the bite of an Egyptian asp, some historians aren't so sure. There are some who debate that she could have taken some kind of poison possibly to end her life. As for her children by Mark Antony, no one truly knows what became of them. Yet another enticing mystery in the life of one of the most extraordinary women in history.